Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is another installment of the series What If Cinema. And the topic at hand this time is what if Michael J. Fox was in Teen Wolf 2, and what would that film be like? And before I go any further sharing my thoughts on this topic, I want to give a special shout out to Sylvia for requesting this topic and for a very generous donation to the channel. And I also want to thank all of you. I want to thank everyone for their support, whether it's through paid requests or through just kind words in the comments. It all means a lot to me, and thank you. Now, for the idea and the concept of Teen Wolf 2, it's an interesting one because if you look at the budget for the actual Teen Wolf 2, it was considerably more than the first Teen Wolf. It was like estimated around $5 to $6 million. It's not on the screen for the actual Teen Wolf 2, but for the concept that I have in mind, I think that's more than enough money to be able to pull this off. When I was thinking about this what if scenario, I was thinking about a film that Michael J. Fox at this time in his career, coming off of Back to the Future, would actually agree to do. And that's difficult because Michael J. Fox didn't really have the best first impression of Teen Wolf. In fact, he dogged the film a little bit. He was talking about how, oh, Spielberg's shooting some serious film across the street, and here I am uh, doing a movie about a teenage werewolf. And if you see or read or listen to interviews with Michael J. Fox when he's talking about this movie, he doesn't seem that enthusiastic about it or enthusiastic about his time working on the film, specifically because it was a lot of trouble and it was a pain in the ass to get in makeup almost every day of the production. And it was uncomfortable and it wasn't fun and he didn't like that. So you would have to make a Teen Wolf sequel that would enable Michael J. Fox to be the star but not be the wolf that much. And I thought of a pretty good idea that you would have a stunt double who would just be the wolf. And honestly, that's what happened during the basketball scenes anyway. So I don't think audiences would really have too many issues with that. Or you would have some scenes where, he'd just be Michael J. Fox, but, maybe his eyes would glow red again and maybe he'd show some super strength or something. That kind of thing. Like, you wouldn't necessarily have to have your star in makeup if one of the big reasons why they don't want to do the film is because they don't want to be in makeup. You can work around that. And I think having a stunt double and changing things around in terms of story, I think it's definitely something that you can do. Also, in terms of a story, you make it so the wolf doesn't necessarily have to be a primary focal point. It's still a, a definite part of the story. There's still moments where the wolf comes out and there's still werewolf elements, but it's not the biggest selling point this time around. It's Michael J. Fox, it's other aspects of the plot. And I wouldn't even have anything involving sports in this sequel because at this point it's a cliche, it's expected, and that's a lazy route to go when it comes to storytelling. Uh, and I don't think Michael would be very enthusiastic about that either. Oh, it's just the same movie as Teen Wolf, but this time I'm in college and I'm playing football. No thanks. So, what I would do is I would take a page from Fright Night or other horror comedies from the 80s and retool this franchise into a horror comedy. and actually have horror elements. Not like the first movie where there really weren't any. It wasn't trying to be scary or anything. And I'm not talking about make it R rated and gory. No, not at all. It's still PG 13 at 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 uh at worst, or at best, to be honest. Like, 'cause a lot of films from this time period that were PG 13 were pretty awesome. Let's be real here. But I think that having more of an edge, having more of a bite, actually bringing in some genuine horror elements, I think would really breathe some new life into this franchise and definitely make it appeal to an even bigger audience at the time. And it would be an interesting project for Michael J. Fox to take on because he hadn't really done anything like that. So I, I would definitely beef up the horror elements. And how I would do that is I would make it, like a werewolf versus vampire story. I think that's a fun idea. You could throw in a backstory where Scott's mom was killed by a vampire. And Scott finds out about this when there's this vampire that starts showing up in the town and starts wreaking havoc and um, causing a lot of problems at the school and all this other stuff. And that's where you can find out that from Scott's dad that that's what happened to his mom. His mom was killed by a vampire. So then you have that animosity, you have that reason for revenge, that reason for Scott to actually become the wolf again in order to get revenge on his mother's death. And I would still have comedic elements for sure. I would still have Styles there making jokes, being his usual fun, obnoxious self. I think he could still be a really fun uh, um, wingman and tag team partner in this scenario. I would extend the relationship between Boof and Scott and make that more fleshed out and have them be a couple and maybe have some moments where the vampire is getting in between them, kind of similar to what happened in Fright Night with Charlie and Amy. And I just think it would be a fun concept to play around with where, Scott, maybe he's met his match because now he's got to deal with this vampire at the school. And I know some people are like, well, why would there be a vampire at the school? It's Teen Wolf 2. You can figure it out. Like, turn your brain off, leave it at the door anyway, because it's Teen Wolf 2. I wouldn't have them like in a duel or anything or play competitive sports against one another. That's not at all what I would do. Maybe there could be a final clash confrontation in the gymnasium at the end between the two of them, or something along those lines. But I wouldn't be really strictly sports related. And yeah, I think that could be a lot of fun. Maybe he could play up the vampire's abilities. He's using mind control on the town. He's doing all this other stuff. Scott's feeling left out because now the vampire is all the rage. Maybe you could have a little bit of the sports. Maybe you could have a little bit of the basketball stuff, but flip it on its head where now the vampire is the one that's, getting all the adulation and he's on the team and Scott feels alienated and doesn't understand why everybody's loving this vampire guy and has already forgotten about the wolf, that kind of stuff. I think that would be interesting. And of course I would tie things in where the vampire guy is, he's the son of, the guy who killed his mom, or he actually is the guy who killed Scott's mom. And I think it would be fun in terms of casting to have someone like Robert Russler as the vampire. I think that would be a really clever bit of casting. Uh, or you could have. There's another idea that I had because I think Robert Russler would be great because I think it's definitely around the right time for him to be in this kind of movie, and this is kind of in his prime as an actor. But I think another option that would be interesting is having Mark Arnold come back as Mick, but he gets turned into a vampire, and then you bring back that rivalry, but in a different way. Like that would be an interesting potential path to take things story wise. But I think that just raises a lot of complications and just makes things a little bit samey because it's just the same villain again, but this time around he's a vampire. So that's more of a plan B than anything. Like, but for me, I would rather have like a whole new character with a whole new backstory and everything. And yeah, I would have the vampire uh mess around with people and be intimidating and be kind of a bully but also be popular in the school and use mind control to his advantage and maybe create a whole crew of vampires, a whole gang of vampires. And it's up to Scott and Styles and Boof and Chubb to stop these vampires and stop this guy from essentially taking over the town. And there's a lot of pressure with that too because of, there's a lot of stakes now. But at the same time, this guy killed his mom. So you have that extra added bit of drama that's added to the story. And yeah, you have the final confrontation, maybe in the school gymnasium or maybe in, some old abandoned building or in the church, or something like that. And of course, Scott would be victorious, but I have him take his licks. Definitely have him take his licks. And I would even change up the design of the wolf because this is you could look at it as, oh, when he initially became a werewolf, or when you have these moments where he wolfs out, or when his father wolfs out, these are moments that just come kind of naturally. But like if he wolfs out of anger or out of a need to survive, then it's like a super wolf kind of thing. And I think that would be fun to play with in terms of makeup effects as well. And that's where you definitely would have a stunt double because Michael J. Fox isn't a ripped guy, so you're not gonna do that. Um, and yeah, I would probably have the werewolf look closer to like the werewolf in the Monster Squad or something along those lines. As a super wolf, and he would essentially kind of hulk up a little bit and then kick the vampire's ass at the end of the movie in a crowd pleasing scene. And he would get revenge for the loss of his mother. He would save the town from this vampire, and you'd roll to end credits. Kiss Boof. Say a one-liner. End of movie. And I would definitely still have a very strong selection of songs for the soundtrack. I would probably try to get a lot of pop artists or heavy metal bands at the time that were a little bit under the radar that you could get to do a soundtrack for this movie and not have to pay them too much to create original songs for the film. And in terms of the score, it would definitely be different compared to what the first film was because it's a horror comedy. So there's scenes that are going to be more serious and more scary. So, I think, of course, this is an obvious choice, but since it's kind of inspired by Fright Night, but I think Brad Fidel would probably do some good work. Christopher Young maybe. Um, but I don't know about this time because Christopher Young hadn't really done a lot of scores at this time in '87. Like he when it would go on Hellraiser, of course, but he wasn't really a big name yet, so I don't know about that. But there's a lot of different options you could probably throw out there in terms of a composer. Effects wise, I think you could probably still bring back Jeff Dawn if you want, who did the effects for the first movie. Or if you don't want to do Jeff Dawn, you can bring in somebody like Tom Berman, who Jeff Dawn was a protege of his. So you could have Tom Berman actually do the effects this time around because he's doing vampires as well as like a different take on the Teen Wolf. And I would also definitely go for a different director. No offense to Rod Daniel, but I would go with maybe Fred Decker. You know, he did the Monster Squad, but he didn't do anything else that year. And I know there was at one point, I think he was maybe attached to possibly do some other films that year, but something just it just didn't work out. So I think Fred Decker would be a great choice because he's really good with horror and comedy at this time, and has a really good sense and an idea of how to really nail and handle a concept like this. Make it an entertaining, fun movie with fun lines of dialogue, with fun characters, but also shoot some scenes that are a little creepy, a little eerie, but have the right tone, the right mix of things, so it's not too jarring in terms of showing the horror versus the comedy, and can shoot action really well, utilize a decent budget in a way where you get the most out of it. And you know, with Michael J. Fox as a star, this could have been the film that would have actually solidified him as a legit option in the industry. Because, and maybe if this came out before the Monster Squad, maybe the Monster Squad would have done better. Because people are like, well, that guy did Teen Wolf 2, and that movie was cool. I actually think that was better than the first Teen Wolf. So I'm going to go definitely want to see the Monster Squad. But, you know, that might just be wishful thinking on my part. And yes, I know I'm almost 20 minutes into this video and I haven't necessarily mentioned the MTV show and how similar the MTV show's approach is to my concept. And that's because I've never watched the show. And just because that show wound up doing a concept like this years later, that doesn't mean you can't do that again, but in the 80s. I think that's not one of those things where, oh, well, that's just the same as that. And I'm like, not necessarily. And honestly, the idea of werewolves fighting vampires is not something that the Teen Wolf show created or came up with to begin with. And you know, we had that with, you know, the Universal monster movies, you know, the mashup films where Dracula fought the Wolfman. Like that's something that was already a thing even before the MTV show. But I think it'd be fun to have like an 80s take on it and have Michael J. Fox as the lead. I mean, you can't really go wrong if you have Michael J. Fox in arguably the peak of his career and his charisma and his personality as the lead of your film. And I think, you know, if you really took this idea and you ran with it, this could have been a huge hit. But the folks at Atlantic, they didn't really think outside of the box that much. They just wanted to do the same thing as the first Teen Wolf. And Michael wasn't into that. He didn't want to do that. And you can't blame him. And he made the right decision. And this is a concept too that honestly, even if Michael J. Fox, like, oh, you know, he refuses, he won't do it even for a big paycheck. All right, you can have Styles have more of a bigger role and have him be the lead, or you can bring in a different actor to play Scott, because it's not like Scott is really a character that is so well written and so well rounded that you can't have someone else portray him. And I think it still would work because it would still have a really clever, fun script and be a good mix of horror and comedy. but maybe you could just retool it into just a completely different movie, and it's not Teen Wolf 2. It's just some other kind of werewolf horror comedy, which that would have worked too. Um, I'm surprised we didn't really get something like that, to be perfectly honest, around this time. It seemed like a pretty big missed opportunity. That's why I decided it was the perfect concept to utilize for this what if video. Like, what if Michael J. Fox was in Teen Wolf 2? And when I thought about it, it was like, yeah, werewolf versus vampire, Fright Night with a little bit of Teen Wolf. You know, like, I don't understand why that wasn't a thing in the 80s. And maybe there's some film that exists that utilized that concept, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. I mean, you had a teenage vampire movie. You know, I was my best friend's a vampire, which is really underrated, and I like that film quite a bit. Honestly, I think it's even better than Teen Wolf, but and it didn't have any werewolf stuff. And you had some moments in the Monster Squad where Dracula, you know, and the Wolfman were in one scene together, but they were on the same team, so it's not like they ever fought each other. So, yeah, surprising that that didn't really happen around this time. Definitely a missed opportunity. And of course, the ideal scenario is Michael J. Fox being the lead, and that's the whole point of this video. So, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Michael in this kind of film would have been awesome. It would have been really cool. He plays a hero. You know, he's not just like, oh, the nerdy guy who becomes a werewolf and becomes popular and then is obnoxious and then decides not to be the werewolf anymore and gains self-confidence and gets the girl. Not that kind of thing. You know, he's actually a hero. He saves the town. You know, he wolfs out, and it's not him just playing basketball or breakdancing or, you know, looking like Chewbacca's son and doing silly, you know, silly shenanigans. It's taken a little more seriously. He wolfs out and defeats the vampire that killed his mother. You know, there's just more to it there. And he saves the town, and he gets the girl. It makes him so he's not just, you know, Michael J. Fox as a werewolf. He's Michael J. Fox as a hero and as a badass, which I think would have been really awesome to see, because you have some moments with Michael J. Fox where he's like that. There's some moments in The Hard Way where you see Michael in that vein. But in all honesty, you didn't really see Michael play those kind of roles that much, because I think a lot of people just felt like he couldn't do it. Oh, you know, he's not capable of that. Because he's Michael J. Fox, he's Marty McFly, he's Alex P. Keaton from Family Ties. But I think with the right script, the right approach, right director, I think Fred Dekker is a great choice. It would have worked. But, you know, there's a reason why this is called What If Cinema. And for whatever reason, the planets didn't align. Fate did not decide that this was going to be a concept or an idea that was ever going to come to be. And we never got a Teen Wolf 2 that was this cool, this good, and this legitimately fun and creative and worthwhile. Instead, we got a Teen Wolf 2 that didn't even have Michael J. Fox as the lead and featured a werewolf boxing in college. And it was just a pale imitation of the first movie. And it's a shame. It's too bad. It really is. It's too bad, because it's a bit of a missed opportunity when you think about it, considering what could have been done and how the franchise started off well, because the movie was a surprise hit and they didn't really do anything with that other than maybe an animated show and of course the MTV show years later. But yeah, just wasn't in the cards. And anyway, thanks for watching my thoughts on Teen Wolf 2 of Michael J. Fox was in the film. and what that movie would be like in the most recent episode of What If Cinema. And until next time, and until the next time I delve into the realm of what if, I'll see you later.